A white envelope, no return address. His name written in shaky handwriting across the front. 17-year-old Landon Mitchell had been sorting through the day's mail with the casual indifference of a teenager who rarely received anything more interesting than college brochures and credit card offers. But this envelope was different, personal. Inside, he found two things that would change his understanding of how kindness moves through the world: a check for $500 and a handwritten letter that began, "Dear Landon, I'm a Marine veteran, 72 years old, and I wanted to thank you for reminding me that good people still exist." The story behind that letter started a week earlier with what Landon thought was just a moment of common courtesy at a gas station ATM. But sometimes the smallest gestures cast the longest shadows, and sometimes kindness finds its way back to us in ways we never could have imagined. This is Hopeful Horizon. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and follow for stories that prove compassion doesn't need a spotlight to change lives. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and Landon Mitchell was walking home from Roosevelt High with his backpack slung over one shoulder and his mind focused on the chemistry test he had the next day. The route took him past Murphy's gas station, a family-owned place that had anchored the corner of 5th and Main for as long as anyone could remember. That's when he noticed the man at the ATM. The elderly gentleman was probably in his 70s, wearing a faded navy peacoat that had seen better decades and a baseball cap that read U.S. Marines in gold letters. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Landon's attention. It was his obvious frustration with the machine in front of him. The man was holding his debit card with hands that trembled slightly, whether from age or anxiety, Landon couldn't tell. He'd insert the card, wait for prompts, then pull it out and start over. Even from 20 feet away, Landon could hear him muttering under his breath. "Come on, you stupid thing," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been fighting this battle for several minutes. "These new machines hate me." Landon slowed his pace, watching as the man tried again. The card went in, came back out. The screen flickered back to the welcome message. The man's shoulders sagged with the kind of defeat that comes from technology that refuses to cooperate when you need it most. For a moment, Landon hesitated. He was 17, and approaching elderly strangers wasn't exactly in his comfort zone. The man might be embarrassed by the offer of help, might prefer to figure it out on his own. But something in the man's posture, in the careful way he was handling his card, in the quiet desperation of his repeated attempts, made Landon's decision for him. "Excuse me, sir," Landon said, approaching slowly with his hands visible, trying to project helpfulness rather than intrusion. "Are you having trouble with the machine?" The man looked up, and Landon saw eyes that were sharp and intelligent, but filled with frustration. "This damn thing keeps rejecting my card," he said, holding up the piece of plastic like evidence in a trial. "I've been banking here for 15 years, and suddenly it doesn't recognize me." Landon nodded toward the ATM. "Mind if I take a look? Sometimes these machines are just picky about how you insert the card." The man stepped aside gratefully. "I'd appreciate that, son. I'm not great with technology, and I really need to get some cash out today." Landon examined the ATM screen, which was displaying a generic error message. "Okay, let's try this step by step. First, make sure the card is facing the right direction, magnetic strip down and to the right. Then, insert it slowly, and leave it in until the machine tells you to remove it." He guided the man through each step, without ever touching the card or the keypad himself, understanding instinctively that dignity mattered more than efficiency. "Now, enter your PIN. Take your time. The machine will wait for you." The man's fingers moved deliberately across the keypad, and this time, instead of an error message, the screen displayed his account options. "There we go," Landon said with a smile. "Now just select the account you want to withdraw from, enter the amount, and wait for your cash and receipt." The relief on the man's face was immediate and profound. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, watching as the machine processed his request. "You made that look easy." "These machines can be tricky," Landon said diplomatically. "Sometimes they're just having a bad day." The ATM dispensed $20 bills with a mechanical whir, and the man carefully counted them before folding the money and placing it in his wallet. The transaction that had been frustrating him for 10 minutes was completed in less than 2. "Thank you," the man said, and there was something in his voice that suggested the gratitude went deeper than just the ATM assistance. "I was starting to think I was losing my mind." "Happens to everyone," Landon assured him. "Technology isn't always user-friendly." As the man tucked his wallet into his coat pocket, Landon noticed the careful way he handled his money, the way he double-checked to make sure his card was secure. There was something about his movements that spoke of someone for whom every dollar mattered, someone who couldn't afford the luxury of casual spending. The man looked at Landon for a long moment, as if trying to memorize his face or figure out how to adequately express his appreciation. There was an awkwardness in the air, the kind that comes when someone wants to offer payment for a kindness that wasn't performed for money. "I wish I had something to give you for your trouble," the man said finally, his voice carrying a note of embarrassment. "Some way to repay you for taking the time." Landon waved off the suggestion immediately. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I was just walking by and saw you were having trouble. Anyone would have done the same thing." But even as he said it, Landon realized it might not be true. He'd watched plenty of people walk past others in need, had seen the way society had trained everyone to mind their own business, to assume someone else would help. The fact that he'd stopped, that he'd offered assistance to a stranger, was perhaps less common than he wanted to believe. The man seemed to understand this too. "Not everyone would have stopped," he said quietly, "and fewer still would have been so patient about it. You reminded me of someone I used to know, someone who would have done exactly what you just did." There was a story behind those words, Landon could tell, a memory that had been triggered by this simple interaction. But the man didn't elaborate, and Landon didn't press. "Well, I hope your day gets better from here," Landon said, adjusting his backpack and preparing to continue his walk home. "It already has," the man replied. Then he extended his hand for a shake. "What's your name, son?" "Landon Mitchell," he answered, accepting the handshake. The man's grip was firm despite his age, the kind of handshake that spoke of a generation that believed such things mattered. "Landon Mitchell," the man repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Tom Garrett, and I want you to know that what you did today, it meant more than you probably realize." There was something in Tom's eyes as he said this, something that made Landon feel like he was missing part of the conversation. But before he could respond, Tom was already stepping back, adjusting his marine cap, and preparing to head in the opposite direction. "You take care of yourself, Landon Mitchell," Tom said, "and keep being the kind of person who stops to help. The world needs more people like you." With that, Tom walked away, moving with the careful but determined gait of someone whose body had served him well for 7 decades, but was beginning to show the wear. Landon watched him go, feeling oddly moved by the encounter, but unable to articulate why. It had been such a small thing, really. A few minutes of his time, a basic understanding of how ATMs worked, a willingness to help a stranger, hardly the stuff of grand gestures or heroic acts. And yet, something about Tom's reaction suggested that those few minutes had carried weight far beyond their duration. Landon continued his walk home, thinking about the encounter. There had been something about Tom, a loneliness, perhaps, or a gratitude that seemed disproportionate to the help he'd received. It made Landon wonder about the man's story, about what had brought him to that ATM on a Tuesday afternoon, about why such a simple act of assistance had seemed to mean so much. But by the time he reached his house, Landon's attention had shifted back to his chemistry test and the dozen other concerns that fill a 17-year-old's life. The encounter with Tom became a pleasant memory, the kind of interaction that makes you feel good about the world for a few hours before fading into the background of daily life. He had no way of knowing that for Tom, those few minutes would become something much more significant, that they would trigger a decision that would outlast both of their lives. A week later, Landon was sorting through the mail with his usual teenage indifference when the white envelope caught his attention. His name was written across the front in handwriting that was clearly elderly, the careful, deliberate cursive of someone who had learned penmanship in an era when such things were considered essential life skills. There was no return address, which struck him as odd. Most mail came with corporate logos or official government markings. This looked personal, almost intimate in its simplicity. Landon tore open the envelope and found 2 items inside, a folded check and a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper. The check made him do a double take. $500 made out to him, signed by Thomas J. Garrett. The name took him a moment to place, and then he remembered. Tom, the elderly man from the ATM. But it was the letter that truly captured his attention. Dear Landon, I hope you remember me. I'm the old man you helped at the ATM outside Murphy's gas station last Tuesday. Tom Garrett. I've been thinking about our encounter all week, and I felt compelled to write to you. I'm a Marine veteran, 72 years old, and I've lived what most people would call a quiet life. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home, worked construction for 40 years, and tried to be a decent man. I never married, never had children, and at this stage of my life, there aren't many people left to call family. Most of my old friends have passed on, and I find myself alone more often than not. That day at the ATM, I wasn't just having trouble with technology. I was having one of those days when everything feels impossible, when the world seems designed for people younger and more capable than myself. I was trying to withdraw enough money to cover my medications and groceries for the week, and that simple task had become a mountain I couldn't climb. Then you appeared. Not just to help, but to help with such patience and kindness. You didn't make me feel stupid or helpless. You didn't rush me or take over. You guided me through it like I was someone worth taking time for. And when I thanked you, you acted like it was nothing, like helping strangers was just what people do. But here's what you don't know. In the last 5 years, as I've gotten older and less steady on my feet, I've encountered more impatience than kindness. I've seen people roll their eyes when I move slowly, heard them sigh when I need extra time, felt them treat me like an inconvenience rather than a person. I had begun to think that courtesy was a thing of the past, that young people no longer cared about their elders. You proved me wrong. In those 5 minutes, you gave me back my faith in humanity. You reminded me that good people still exist, that kindness hasn't disappeared from the world. I recently sold my old pickup truck, a 1987 Ford that served me well but was becoming too much for me to maintain. I've been sitting on that money, wondering what to do with it. I don't need much at my age, and I have no family to leave it to. But after meeting you, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with at least part of it. The enclosed check is my way of saying thank you, but it's more than that. It's my way of investing in the kind of person you are, the kind of person who stops to help strangers, who treats elderly people with dignity, who still believes in doing the right thing simply because it's right. I don't expect you to spend this money in any particular way. Maybe it will help with college, maybe it will just make your life a little easier. But I want you to know that every time you use it, you're carrying forward the kindness you showed me. You're proof that one generation can still learn from another, that respect and courtesy haven't died out completely. Thank you for reminding me that I still matter, that I'm still worthy of kindness. Thank you for taking the time to help an old man with a stubborn machine. And thank you for being the kind of person who makes the world a little brighter just by being in it. With deep gratitude and respect, Tom Garrett, Gunnery Sergeant, USMC, retired, Landon, read the letter twice, then a third time, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. This wasn't just a thank you note. It was a testament, a final gesture from someone who had been profoundly moved by a simple act of kindness. He looked at the check again, really processing the amount. $500. For a teenager working part-time at a local restaurant, it was a significant sum. But more than the money, it was the thought behind it, the decision by a lonely old man to share his limited resources with a stranger who had treated him with basic human decency. Landon felt something shift inside him as he held the letter. He thought about Tom, sitting alone somewhere, taking the time to write this message by hand, to explain not just his gratitude, but his entire perspective on what their brief encounter had meant. The loneliness that came through in every line, the dignity with which he described his circumstances, the generous spirit that had prompted him to turn a moment of personal kindness into a gift for someone else. "Mom," he called out, his voice carrying a weight that made his mother appear immediately in the doorway. "What is it, honey?" Landon handed her the letter and the check. "You need to read this." His mother, Janet Mitchell, read the letter with growing amazement, her expression shifting from curiosity to deep emotion. When she finished, she looked up at her son with tears in her eyes. "Landon, this is incredible," she said softly. "Do you realize what this man has done? He's given you his story, his gratitude, and a piece of his heart." "I know," Landon replied, still processing the weight of it all. "But Mom, I feel like I should do something more. Maybe I should visit him, or write back, or—" Janet held up the envelope, examining it more closely. "Honey, there's no return address. And look at the postmark. This was mailed from the VA hospital downtown." A cold realization began to settle over Landon. The careful finality of the letter, the way Tom had described selling his truck and having no family, the formal tone that suggested this might be a last communication rather than the beginning of an ongoing correspondence. "We should look him up," Landon said urgently. "Thomas J. Garrett, Marine veteran. There can't be that many." His mother was already reaching for her laptop. Within minutes, they were scanning search results for Tom's name, looking for contact information, an address, anything that would help them reconnect with the man who had just changed Landon's understanding of how profound a simple kindness could be. What they found instead was an obituary published in the local newspaper just 3 days earlier. Thomas Joseph Garrett, 72, passed away peacefully on October 31st at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center. A decorated Marine who served 2 tours in Vietnam, Tom was known for his quiet dignity, his strong work ethic, and his dedication to his country. He worked in construction for 4 decades before retiring due to health issues. Tom had no immediate family, but was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and kindness. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the local Veterans Affairs Hospital. Services were held privately. The silence in the room was profound. Landon stared at the obituary, trying to reconcile the vital, grateful man he'd helped at the ATM with the finality of this announcement. Tom had written his letter, mailed his check, and passed away within days of their encounter. "He knew," Janet whispered, reading the obituary again. "He knew he was dying, and he wanted to make sure his gratitude reached you." Landon looked at the letter again, seeing it now not just as a thank you note, but as a final testament from a man who had chosen to spend some of his last conscious moments expressing appreciation for kindness. The careful handwriting, the detailed explanation, the generous gift, all of it had been Tom's way of ensuring that their brief connection would have lasting meaning. The date on the letter, Landon noticed, checking the signature. He wrote this the day after I helped him. He went straight home and wrote this. The implications were staggering. Tom had been so moved by those few minutes of assistance that he'd immediately sat down to compose this response. He'd made the decision to share not just his money, but his entire story, to turn a chance encounter into a lasting lesson about the power of simple human kindness. Janet reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "Landon, do you understand what this means? This man spent some of his final days thinking about you, about the kindness you showed him. You gave him something precious in his last week of life. You reminded him that good people still exist." Landon nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with such a gift. This wasn't just money. It was a legacy, a charge to continue being the kind of person who stops to help, who treats others with dignity, who believes in the power of small acts of kindness to change lives. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, knowing he would keep it forever. Tom Garrett had given him more than $500. He'd given him a story, a purpose, and a reminder that every interaction we have with another person carries the potential to be someone's last good memory of humanity. Landon Mitchell went to that ATM thinking he was just helping an elderly man withdraw some cash. What he received in return was a masterclass in how kindness echoes through the world in ways we never expect. Tom Garrett didn't have much. No family, few possessions, a modest income from his military pension. But he had something more valuable than wealth, the wisdom to recognize goodness when he saw it, and the generosity to invest his final resources in celebrating that goodness. The $500 was significant, but it wasn't the real gift. The real gift was the story, the reminder that our smallest acts of courtesy can become someone else's most treasured memory. That patience with a stranger can restore their faith in humanity. That taking a few minutes to help can become someone's last evidence that the world still contains kind people. Landon used part of Tom's gift to establish a small scholarship fund at his high school, awarded annually to students who demonstrate exceptional kindness to others. The rest he kept, not as spending money, but as seed money, funds set aside to help others the way Tom had helped him, to continue the circle of generosity that the old Marine had started. Tom Garrett served his country in Vietnam, worked construction for 40 years, and lived a quiet life that few people noticed. But in his final week, he created a legacy that will outlast most monuments, a reminder that kindness recognized and celebrated has the power to multiply exponentially. If this story moved you, think about the Tom Garretts in your own life, the elderly people who struggle with technology, who move a little slower, who might just need someone to see them as worthy of patience and respect. Your few minutes of kindness might become their most cherished memory. Drop a comment about where you're watching from, and follow for more stories that prove small acts of human decency can cast shadows much longer than we ever imagine. Until next time, remember that every person you encounter is carrying a story, and your kindness might be the chapter they remember most. This is Hopeful Horizon, signing off.